What's up, future shred lords? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. Got asked a question about synergy. What is that? Essentially, again, levels of awareness. If I start playing a scale in the appropriate position, meaning in terms of a key, if I were to play E minor over an E minor chord or the 6th degree of, say, the G major scale, then that scale and the chord itself would sync up. They would synergize, right? And you can do that in other ways by basically creating tension and release, which is another huge topic under the music umbrella, right? A very important one, obviously. And you can do that using synergy and superimposition, but synergy happens after you understand superimposition. So you figure out the scale system, you're like, okay, this is good. And you're like, if I pick the whole scale system up and move it and then just play everything relative, but just start on one of these other sort of notes of the scale, I get a really cool effect. Basically the modes, right? If you stop playing the major scale and start playing the Lydian mode over top of the major scale, you're going to be like, damn, that's awesome. Right? So now all of a sudden you're cooking with gas, but it takes a little bit of practice. Obviously you got to speed by some of those more tension-filled notes. But once you get good at it and you understand resolution, obviously jumping back into the major scale afterwards, then obviously, so you start Lydian and then end back in the Ionian position, you'd be like, okay, that makes a lot more sense now in terms of what I'm trying to accomplish musically speaking. And that right there basically encapsulates synergy. Lydian and Ionian are going to work really, really, really well together. So that's a big tip. And essentially I'm doing that here. I start off in the Phrygian position, okay, and I play basically a minor 7 inversion that's already inherent to the Phrygian position. But from there, instead of going to the normal major 7 inversion, which is like the D type from the Cage system, I go into the one from Locrian, and that's synergy right there. So I go from a minor 7 to a major 7 arpeggio, but it creates this really killer effect, right? And from there, that lets me reposition myself from the previous parent key into a new key and do this whole step sequence based on the minor pentatonic scale as I ascend, right? So I'm ascending using the minor 7, descending using the major 7, borrowed from another key, and that already sets me up now to do this whole step sequence from that new key. That gets me all the way up to its pentatonic. From the pentatonic system in the Aeolian position, I come back down using a major 7 inversion, but on 2 strings using 3 octaves principle. Nails it, right? From there, I dipsy-doodle down to the major, right? G major, I ascend in groups of 6 using the pentatonic scale. And then I'm like, okay, I might as well start to sneak in some of these more bluesy notes, right? So, of course, I'm going to concentrate in the Ionian and Dorian position. All I'm doing in Dorian position is taking that pentatonic skeleton and adding a whole bunch of notes. Notes from the Ionian system, notes from the blues scale, okay, which is just a flattened 3rd or a flattened 6th or a flattened 7th or whatever you want to do it in relation to however you want to see that. There's so many ways of doing it. Just call it the blues note, the one that sounds bluesy, right? I'm adding chromaticism. Doing stuff like that that allows me to sort of change up the sequence and pattern of notes obviously goes a long way, right? Coming down, you know, I sort of finish my thing. Then I go back into a whole step pattern, but instead of, you know, using the pentatonic system, now I use the 3 octaves principle, recycle it again. That allows me to jump up until I can do, again, that same sort of 3 octaves principles, but instead of using an arpeggio, now I use sort of more like a scalar system. Right, so again, I'm recycling the 3 octaves principles about 3 different ways. First, just using the pentatonic system, climbing up 3 octaves that way, but it's not symmetrical. Then I use it using a symmetrical whole tone position, and then I use another one where it's based around using 3 notes per string with adding an extra note on the last string. Obviously, 3 notes, an extra note, 3 notes, an extra note. That's how I like to see it. Or 3 and 4 if you want to, go ahead. You get the idea. I'm using the same principles over and over and over again, 3 octaves principle. But I can change it up. Instead of doing just a pentatonic one, be like, what if I use 3 notes per string and then just choose groupings of whole note steps from that one? In this case, I'm starting from Ionian. And then start doing a sequence. Listen to how badass that sounds. If you know what I'm talking about, you know the part I'm talking about. It's just really killer. It's right after I do that really bluesy run coming down that I've done a couple times now, just trying to recycle some of these licks so you get an idea that you can use them over and over and over again, right, to practice and get some outside sort of playing happening at the same time to develop your ear. But then I go into that really tasty sort of whole tone sequence with respect to the major, and it just using the sort of note pattern and sequence itself, it sounds absolutely blistering. It's like a pattern of 3 and 4s and whatnot. Just, And that's just it, working on it in the moment, right? So you're trying to change up the timing. You're trying to get a bit of groove happening there, a little bit of a swing feel, right? Don't be afraid to make mistakes. You can clearly hear that I'm not playing perfectly. That's because there it is. At the end of the video, I play part A and part B slower and with less embellishments, obviously, just to get you to see that you can now sort of break it up even more into 2 separate little sections. And then I do a free jam, A and B, if you will, where they get a lot more complicated, but without the backing track, just using the same principles. And again, you'll sort of hear me kick it up a notch or several. Again, I don't go too crazy. I don't use too many arpeggios. I kind of keep it to the scales and whatnot. But you can hear me sort of working the dexterity exercises with hammer-ons and pull-offs, trying to get these things faster and better because I didn't play for 7 months or whatever it is. So, you know, you got to work on those kind of things, and obviously adding in those more bluesy notes and stuff like that. And then, of course, you can feel me now using slides, bends, and vibrato and more sort of poignantly arranged note sequences to create melody, to really take the notes over the top or end my ideas. There's a start, there's a middle shreddy part, and then there's an end. I'm planning things out. I'm changing up the tempo. I'm changing up the feel. I'm using superimposition to try to create synergy. And then I'm trying to use my mind to pre-plan what I'm doing. I have a rough roadmap, but then how I sort of layer my musical idea over top of it, obviously, is up to me. And that's what you're really working on to improve your improvisation skills. So I think that's the end of me chit-chatting. I know most of you probably be like, I didn't understand a lot of that. And that's because you need to develop your mind more in terms of breaking down the fretboard into regions, the modal system and whatnot. So when I'm like, go to the Phrygian position, you're like, move to the 3rd degree of a major scale and be like, play it here. If I'm like, do it at B, you're like, nails it. I know exactly where he was starting. And then if I said that, you'd be like, B is the Phrygian position of G major, which is relative to E minor. Okay, so all the pieces, D7 is its 5 chord. These major pieces of information fall into place that really help you break it down. And of course, I'm just bouncing back and forth because when I play that B as now the next one, that's C major. Right, so technically I'm playing E minor 7 and C major 7, which in this case is the key of C major. But the E minor is inherent to both G major and C major. So that's what lets me stick the C major 7 in there. That's the real technical theory sort of definition for the first little part. And of course that C major lets me just keep going with the whole step sequence based on the A minor pentatonic sequence. I think you're getting the point here, right? So again, I'm thinking in terms of A minor pentatonic when I'm playing that whole thing, and that's what's my slide rule. By the time I get all the way down, I'm back to G major. So I'm flip-flopping between C major and G major for the entirety of this entire lick until I get to the free play stuff where I get a lot more experimental. Now I'm done. Right. So the key takeaway here is this: now when you're combining ideas, listen for ideas that actually make sense. You're like, I have this minor 3rd step for this arpeggio. What other arpeggio starts with a minor 3rd that I could layer over top? Be like, start with that one, end with this one. Not so great. Start with that one, end with this one. Okay, no, that one sounded way better. Synergy. Then take that and put on a backing track and be like, over this static chord that's equal to the one here, Does it sound better when I do it over G7, or does it sound better when I do it over, you know, the E7 or whatever it is? And boom, you're basically putting all the pieces in place to be able to practice this stuff and actually get it under your fingers. And then when you're practicing doing the freehand stuff, just try to look for interesting note clusters and just be more experimental. Don't worry so much about trying to be perfect. Instead, try to express yourself, like just walking up to a piece of paper and writing stuff down, or drawing a picture or whatever, just randomly, right off the top of your head. Done. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate every single one of you. Good luck in your practice sessions. There'll be more punishment. We're going to do foundations though, so I'm just going to go through every single thing you're supposed to know, from the minor pentatonic scale, the major scale, the triad arpeggios, and the dominant 7 arpeggios, and the whole step sequence and stuff like that. I'm going to go through each one of them one at a time, and if you can play them all, then you're the Pokemon master. See you in the next one.